origins of mankind, um, or even what is love, what is truth, or what is even ultimate reality. If you get into these questions that often plague our minds as human beings, all of us, and you have this attitude of, well, there's so many choices and I can't choose whether our purpose is to watch the Kardashians all day and follow them or actually to improve the world. It could be either one, and you kind of flatten it out like that. Uh, if you say you just can't decide and give up the journey to even search for these truths, in my particular opinion, you have given up one of the things that makes us human, and I could even categorize it as cowardice, uh, or losing heart. It's just something that's like, why, because of the daunting task of discovering ultimate reality, why we're here, why would you lay it down because it's difficult or because people disagree about why we're here? Why stop searching for those things? These things are natural human questions, but it's almost as though that you kind of throw your hands up and say, "Ah, well, I can't figure it out. I'm just gonna give up on it," which a lot of people do with even their dreams. And then a lot, I notice this about a lot of people who are all about being correct and making sure they have all their ducks in a row, making sure all the lights are green before they go. They are not as willing to take risks and experience things for themselves, and so they go through this kind of analysis paralysis. Many of the people in the scientific community and people who have those type of personalities suffer very extremely from analysis paralysis, and it's very difficult to get them to just dive into something and move forward with life. And so let's move on here.
Is the true horror of religion. It allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay? But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic.
Okay, so I want to pause it right there. Okay, so this guy, he ends up going with this route, which is very common for atheists to do, or people even who are in the religion of scientism. He says that it allows perfectly normal people to believe in a group setting that only, of course, lunatic would believe alone. Now, the problem of that is that there is a kind of uh, schizophrenia within the scientific community regarding the supernatural or even miracles, right? Miracles or the supernatural is that there is at the same time a disdain or kind of scoffing at the idea of the supernatural or miracles. As I say, like, yo, you are a lunatic if you believe something happened like uh, the 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 Eucharist or the Mass or transubstantiation, which is what he's referring to, or like that God talks to you, right? So, but at the same time, when you press these people, like go ahead and press an unbeliever on what would prove God to them. What would prove God to you? Ask them that, and they will do one of two things. They will either tap dance around that question and kind of be vague and uh, actually, let's say three things. One, they'll tap dance around it. They will say that um, essentially, in one way or another, I would be convinced, right? What would convince you? What would convince me is that I would be convinced, right? Which is to say, conversion, right? So, what would convince you that God exists? Conversion, right? Duh. I mean, that's obvious from the get go. But if they don't answer with something that's obvious, or like such as conversion, obviously, if I was converted, I'd be convinced. Yes, obviously, if you're convinced, you will be converted. Uh, or they don't tap dance around it, they will inevitably, if they're honest, actually, no, not even if they're honest, if they even give you an answer, they will just say something in the form of a miracle. I've heard things like, oh, well, God will write in the sky and say this, or appear to him and say, I'm a God, and do something. However, this is the problem where they're divided against themselves, is that if they were to experience something like that, God speaking to them, then they would have already classified themselves as a lunatic, because after all, only a lunatic would actually think that they hear from God. So what you have here is the rejection of the miraculous, or God speaking directly to a human being, but also the hidden desire for that to occur. And he even scoffs at saying, that I believe this bread and wine turns into Elvis Presley or whatever, which is a little bit more of a complicated thing, but I'll just delve into it in a nutshell. Is that in the Catholic Church, what they have in that the bread and wine is Jesus' body and blood, is they have this idea that's called transubstantiation, which is a big word to actually describe what they think is going on there. But what I want to address is that this idea that the Catholic Church has is based on Aristotelian framework, Aristotelian logic, which is basically that things or matter can be divided, if you will, into both the substance and accidens. And that is to say that things can be something in essence, or in its being, or in its identity, and then also at the same time appear different. So you can have bread maintain all the properties of a bread in its appearance and its and texture and all that stuff, but in some way, which the Catholic Church says is a mystery, it is something else. Now, I don't believe in transubstantiation, but what I believe in is exactly how I would respond to someone saying the Elvis Presley thing to me. So let's answer him and say, what would I think? Would I think a person is a lunatic if they said that that they were eating Elvis Presley? That I say, what are you eating and drinking? They say, I'm drinking or eating Elvis Presley. I could go and say that they're a lunatic or that they're crazy, but also what I tend to do is give people the benefit of doubt and think that they're describing some type of metaphor. And personally, that's what I believe that the Lord's Supper is, actually. It is a metaphor. I don't believe it's merely a metaphor. It has some significance outside of being a metaphor, but you could take that route with it, of course. But he's kind of scoffs at it, and without really giving it a fair shake. Anyway, let's go on.
Christians believe that Christ is the latest prophet. Muslims believe that Muhammad is the latest prophet. Mormons believe that Joseph Smith is the latest prophet.
All right, so let me just pause that really quick. Mormons do not believe that Joseph Smith is the latest prophet, which kind of shows, I can see why he said earlier that he can't decipher what religion to choose, and it's kind of a roll of the dice because he isn't even privy to the religions that he's discussing. Mormonism, they have an ongoing role of prophets, and they may not call it the prophet, but if you actually talk to them and ask them, is there a prophet today, they will say yes. But the way they present it to the public is they call the prophet the president, to kind of mirror American society and whatnot. And they have their own reasons. But either way, they will definitely acknowledge that the current president is the prophet that is here on earth. So Joseph Smith is by no means the latest prophet of God. So he definitely has that wrong.
And stretching this track of thought just a little bit more, Scientologists believe that the science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard was the latest prophet. So many prophets, so little time.
So that again is just going on that I can't choose which prophet is the one to go with. So basically, who do I know is actually the spokesman for God on earth, which is taken for granted that all these religions actually have an oracle or a prophet or somebody who is the mouthpiece of God. Now, you can kind of go against that and say, oh, well, there's all these prophets, and I don't know which one to listen to, and kind of scoff at the idea of God even speaking to someone. But if the disagreement of all these religions is proof that that you can't really trust them, but then the agreement, if the division is proof of something wrong, then the unity is proof of something right, if the pendulum swings both ways. And what they do agree is that there is a certain thing, is the idea of a mouthpiece of God. Now, getting down to really where a lot of people overlook is, it may sound crazy for God to speak to someone, but what if a person were to believe that God speaks to all of us in one way? Like maybe there's special revelation with these prophets, but also possibly you hear from God yourself on a regular basis. Now, of course, the atheist or the non-believer would say, what? I don't hear from God. I never heard his voice and such and so forth. But they're taken for granted and assuming that they have not heard the voice of God because they do not recognize that voice as God. But then if you press them on how do you know you haven't heard the voice of God? It will just be the repetition. I haven't recognized anything as the voice of God. And although they can mock the idea of the special revelation, there is a general revelation, and God speaks to all human beings through their conscience. And so I believe that, yes, there are prophets, but there is also people who hear from God on a regular basis through their conscience. And I believe that your conscience, like the word says, con with science, knowledge, your conscience is proof that you have knowledge of God within you. And when your conscience tells you that you did something wrong, it is actually God speaking to you directly. Anyway, moving on.
The human brain, when it's young, is a sponge. It has to be. It has to take in all the information. It has to trust its parents, its elders, to survive. Without question, don't touch the fire. Why not? Don't go near the wolf. Don't touch that spider with a red dot. Don't touch that. Why not? Just don't. There is a God. What? There is a God. And if you're bad, you go to hell. Okay? And if that's constantly confirmed, like all the other things, wolves eat you, black widows kill you, fires burn you, if it's given that same level of credence and truth, you're never going to get over it. It's going to be a lot harder to undo that.
You talked about the evidence that
Whoa. So